Have you heard of neuro-linguistic programming, also known as NLP? Chances are you've probably heard about it. It's a quite popular thing. NLP is the conceptual framework behind Tony Robbins and a slew of other popular people in the motivational seminar world. There's a chance you may have wondered, what's the deal with this NLP stuff? Is it legitimate or is it bullshit? Are some parts of it legitimate and some parts not? I myself have worked in the NLP world for 6 months. In 2008, I worked for a fairly well-known NLP trainer. I took the job knowing that it would be a strange and interesting experience and would likely give me some good stories. It did result in me experiencing a lot of strange and interesting and just plain weird things. It also resulted in me going down the rabbit hole of what this whole NLP thing was. I wanted to understand this strange and often creepy world I suddenly found myself in. I'm Zach Elwood, and this is the People Who Read People podcast, a podcast aimed at better understanding the people around us and better understanding ourselves. A few weeks ago, I was invited on Chris Shelton's podcast, which is called Speaking of Cults. Chris is a former Scientologist. He was actually raised in that world and was in it for 25 years. Chris has a book titled Scientology, A to Xenu. Now for his podcast, he examines cult-like phenomena in various areas of society. Chris read and watched a few of my episodes exposing the con artist and wannabe guru Chase Hughes. Chase is a rather obvious charlatan who has told many easily disprovable lies and exaggerations about his career and experiences, and has made and continues to make comically absurd claims about what's possible with hypnosis and mind control. I knew Chase was almost certainly a charlatan when I first heard him speak for like a minute on Jordan Harbinger's podcast. And yet Chase has succeeded in getting on some popular shows and podcasts like Joe Rogan's and Diary of a CEO and Dr. Phil's online show and more. Chase has been promoted by some big names and gets millions of views. Over the past few months, he's been leaning more into the spiritual, metaphysical, all-knowing guru realm with his content. And from the reports that people currently or formerly in his inner circle send me, and based on the fawning adoration you can find from various people online, Chase does seem to be establishing a cult-like following. My personal opinion, based on various reports people have sent me, is that we'll one day hear in the news some strange and troubling things about Chase Hughes. I don't think it will end well, is what I'm saying. So Chris wanted to talk to me about Chase Hughes and about Chase's neuro-linguistic programming origins, and more generally about the NLP world and what NLP is all about, and how Chase's work ties into other NLP or NLP-adjacent trainers and faux gurus. We also talk about the good and the bad of NLP. I talk about some of the more positive things I saw in it, and some of those positive things help explain why people can report genuinely good experiences about going to those seminars and getting those types of trainings. Until Chris did this episode, as far as I know, I've been the only person to cover the con artistry and lies of Chase Hughes. You would think Dr. Phil and Joe Rogan and the popular Diary of a CEO podcast promoting an obvious liar and charlatan to millions of people would be bigger news, worthy of at least one article somewhere. But I think the fact that no one else has covered this says a lot about where we are as a society. There's just so much bullshit and nonsense around us, and so many people promoting so many dumb ideas, that this stuff, as weird and surprising as it is, doesn't really even register. And of course, news organizations are in a tough spot these days. There's less money than ever for investigative journalism, and there's just so much more important seeming things in the world of politics and such to cover. Chris and I, at the end of our talk, get on the topic of political polarization and how Joe Rogan's popularity and Chase's popularity relate to that topic. So this is a reshare of Chris's October 11th episode, which was titled Speaking of Cults, Chase Hughes and the NLP Grift. If you like this talk, you might like Chris's podcast. Again, it's on YouTube and is titled Speaking of Cults. Okay, here's the episode.
The Speaking of Cults podcast is presented solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from it is at the user's own risk. The views, information, or opinions expressed by the host and guests are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical or other professional advice. Have you ever watched a mesmerizing self-help seminar, read a book that promised to unlock the secrets of your mind, or seen an online ad for a course in covert persuasion? It's a multi-million-dollar industry built on a single seductive promise that there's a hidden system to control your life, your success, and even the people around you. But what are the roots of that promise? It leads us back to the 1970s and the invention of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, by Richard Bandler and John Grinder. They claim to have cracked the code of human excellence. But from the very beginning, it was a theory heavy on anecdote and light on real science. Despite being consistently debunked as pseudoscience, NLP became a perfect vehicle for entrepreneurs of influence. It created a playbook that was masterfully used by Tony Robbins, who trained with the founders, repackaged their ideas into his own system, and built a billion-dollar empire on mass seminars and motivational entertainment. And that same playbook is being used today by a new generation of gurus. They've swapped the giant arenas for YouTube channels and online courses, but the core grift is the same. Selling the illusion of psychological expertise to a world hungry for easy answers. One of these modern figures is Chase Hughes. He claims to be a best-selling author, but that description is so vague, it doesn't mean anything. He's been featured on major media platforms, and he sells high-priced trainings on what he calls behavioral analysis. He uses the slick language of a behavioral psychologist without seeming to have any professional experience or training to back it up. So when you pull on that thread, the entire tapestry unravels. His credentials appear to be manufactured. His past includes ventures into the world of pickup artistry. His so-called science is a remix of those same old debunked NLP principles, lacking any of the peer-reviewed validation that real psychology demands. So how does this decades-old grift keep evolving? How do figures like Hughes build their credibility, and who is most at risk of being exploited by their claims? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the entire industry. I'm speaking with Zach Elwood, the researcher who has been meticulously investigating Chase Hughes, exposing the lies, and tracing them right back to the well-established playbook of pseudoscientific entrepreneurship. This is a deep dive into how the legacy of NLP fuels modern manipulation and how we can learn to be more critical consumers. Now, here's Zach Elwood. Okay. Hi, Zach. Welcome to my show. And thank you very much for agreeing to be here with me today.
Hey, Chris, honored to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very funny to me how I have sort of dived into this today, how we've arrived here today, because for a number of years, people have thrown at me the relationship between the CIA and Scientology, and there are you probably don't even know or need to know. I mean, there are just so many weird conspiracy theories in the ex-cult world about cults that people have been involved in, and they start drawing comparisons between, government and this and that, and various things. And Scientology has been the subject of a great deal of conspiracy theories. And it was always something that I sort of dismiss out of hand because, as you point out in your own videos, and we both end up quoting Carl Sagan, right? Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And no one ever really brings any real evidence. They just connect these dots of insinuation between the CIA and, mind control. And then, groups like Scientology, they do mind control. So it all must be one big thing, right? And And so this has been thrown at me a number of times, but Chase Hughes is somebody out there who made a very specific claim about the connection between the CIA and Scientology, and that's how he came into my space. I had never even heard of this guy, and you see videos here and there and stuff like that, but I never really paid a lot of attention. And this claim comes along, and I took him at his word that this is a behavioral expert. Somebody kind of, maybe the way he talks, he infers he maybe worked for the CIA at one point or contracted with them or something. There's all these insinuations, and I just kind of,
He's on Joe Rogan.
he's on Rogan. He gets on these big podcasts. So I figured this is a legit guy, and he's just making this really sort of fantastical claim. And so I took it apart and realized, no, he's not just somebody who knows what he's talking about making one false claim. He's really lying through his teeth about this connection, banking on the fact that most people don't know enough about Scientology to debunk what he just said, but I do. So I was like, wait a minute. And that opened the door to, well, who is this guy? And the more I looked into him, the more I found your work coming up, because you have done some championship work debunking this guy. And I watched your videos on this and tracked the links and was like, oh my God, this is a whole other form of grift. So we're talking today because I have been skirting around the subject of neurolinguistic programming for years without ever really diving into it. And now I have this opportunity with you to do so, and now comment on not only Chase Hughes, but this entire sort of semi-industry that sort of sits, I think, adjacent to the manosphere, really, online, and sort of sells people this bill of goods about how easy it is to crack the code of human behavior and sort of manipulation and covert control of people. And it all sort of feeds into this basket of, I'm just trying to get a leg up by controlling and manipulating other people without them knowing I'm doing that. And that's this whole sort of, Chase is one part of this whole industry of people, going back to Tony Robbins and the neurolinguistic programming people. And this goes all the way back to the late 70s and 1980s. So ancient history in some people's minds, but not
Yeah,
mine.
the EST, there was the EST, there was transformational seminars,
Yes.
various sorts. Yeah,
Right.
there was all those things started back in the 70s.
Oh, 70s was a wild time for that
Yeah.
stuff. So, so now maybe, so having introed all of that, right? So let's start off with just a little bit of who you are and how you came into this whole thing, because that's how I came into this conversation today. What's your general background and approach to how you ended up making videos debunking Chase Hughes?
Yeah, it's a long and twisted road, windy road, I guess, not twisted. Sounds bad.
Yeah, twisted a little bit.
A twisted road. Yeah, so my path to it was, I used to play poker for a living. That led to me writing some poker tells books, how to read people. I've always been interested in psychology. That was one of the reasons I was interested in poker from a young age. But then, even apart from that, well, yeah, there's two paths to it, because the poker stuff led to me creating the general mainstream psychology and behavior podcast. So that's one element of it. But then also back in 2008, back when, the recession hit, I was having a hard time finding work, and I got a job working for this NLP seminar trainer guy for like 6 months. So I got an inside view of this world, which to me, I just found really fascinating. I went down the rabbit hole of like, what the heck is this stuff? Because I almost didn't take the job because I knew it was going to be wacky. But that's why that's why I ended up taking it. I was like, well, I don't plan on doing it for a long time. There's not many jobs out there. I'll work for this guy for, a few months and I get some good stories out of it. So, but yeah, and while I was there, I did a lot of research about what the heck are all these ideas? What's going on with this stuff? And I always wanted to write something, longer form, like an article or maybe even a book about it, but it never got around to it. But then, so the later when I had written my poker books and started doing my podcast, that led to me being more aware of this behavior and psychology grift going on. Just by studying, what to do for my podcast, I was like, who are all these? What is all this stuff? Behavior panel, Chase Hughes, various other people, hypnotists kind of people. Um, so that led to me corresponding with, actual legitimate behavior psychology researchers, including some people I've had on my podcast. And so I've kept in the loop about, what they're saying about these guys, and we correspond about them sometimes. And so that kind of makes me feel like I'm, even though I'm just an amateur psychologist myself, self-taught, it makes me feel good that I correspond with these people who know more about it, and draw my attention to specific things that are completely outlandish and absurd. So yeah, that's a long story short of how I got into doing this. And specifically for the Chase Hughes, I listened to him on a podcast briefly on Jordan Harbinger, and I immediately like heard many red flags within like the first minute, where I was like, this is very strange. Like I don't I got to look into this guy. So then like a few months later, I finally looked into him, and it was so much more grifty and con artisty than I ever imagined. Like I just expected to find like exaggerations, but like I didn't expect to find just the abundance of unethical behavior and just exaggerations about his career and his accomplishments on like every facet of everything he'd done, just full of exaggeration and lies. So that was a doozy. That was really eye-opening, but it was also eye-opening seeing how nobody really pushes back on this stuff. Like in the world that he's in, like the behavior panel show that he's in, and these various people that he associates with, nobody pushes back. Nobody cares that you can look up and find the many things he's lied about, see the ridiculous claims he's made on his website, fact check them. Nobody seems to be interested in vetting, which explains why it's kind of a snowball effect. He basically has gotten internet famous by appearing on podcasts. So he
Okay.
goes from one podcast to another, and he keeps leveling up, because it eventually gets to where Joe Rogan's like, oh, he's been on Diary of a CEO podcast. He's been on these other podcasts. They must have vetted him. He must be legitimate. And I think they just invite him on without even vetting him, because you can easily find my work drawing attention to as many lies and ridiculous things. But I think that helps explain how easy it is to fool people these days, because my work is buried under the results of all the podcasts and stuff he's done. If you look for Chase Hughes, it's it's easy to win the SEO battles online, and if you win the SEO battles, the actual fact checking, especially for more online famous people, the amount of interviews he's done way outweighs like the fact checking stuff, right? So that helps explain, like, even in the internet age, it's very easy to fool people and create a false front of expertise, basically. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's really this. I mean, people have asked me if L. Ron Hubbard would be able to pull off Scientology now with the internet. And I have to say, well, yes, of course he would. Because it's not because of how clever he is,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not because the information wouldn't be there to find, but because people just don't look.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They literally just won't pick up the keyboard and type in the words, and it would take you 60 seconds. If you just typed in Chase Hughes debunk,
Mm-hmm.
or
Right.
neurolinguistic programming debunk, or reviews, or fact check, or anything,
Right.
you could find this information. It's not hard to find. Now, you went above and beyond, because you even pulled out, the Wayback Machine stuff to go back to his earlier websites and really dig up the stuff that he's been trying to cleanse from the internet, his old pickup artist days, and get a woman, all over you in an hour, back when he was, did you ever find out what it was? Just because I'm curious, did you ever find out what it was he actually did in the military?
Oh yeah, well, yeah, multiple people have told me that he was a quartermaster in the Navy, which is basically like ship operations and maintenance kind of stuff.
Right. I knew it was something like that. I knew it had to
Yeah.
be something like that.
There's no evidence that he's very careful these days to be very vague about his wording of it. He wants to imply that he did some intelligence or psychology related thing, right? So you really got to watch the ambiguous language, right? Like where
That's
like,
right.
so even including things like I've trained Navy SEALs, that could apply to like literally one Navy SEAL that came to one of his like classes, right? Like
That's
that's
right.
ambiguous. You really got to watch the ambiguous language, right?
That's right. Oh, completely. And this is exactly how Hubbard grifted. I mean, it's the con is the con is the con, right? It's all about telling what Hubbard even actually documented it in Scientology materials when he said you tell an acceptable truth. You tell the truth the person is willing to accept rather than the actual facts. And so, Hubbard flunks out of one of the first classes on atomic and molecular phenomena in school at university, which he flunked out of entirely, didn't even get through university. But then later on, I was a member of the first class on atomic and molecular, fission. And
Right,
he claims to be a nuclear physicist, a nuclear engineer
right.
in the 1950s when, you'd have to dig up his class records. And who's going to do that in 1950 to fact check him, right?
Yeah.
So they count on the laziness and the inability of people to go look
Mhm.
and back up their claims, right?
Yeah. And so, and
And
to your point too, and we could talk
yeah.
about this more, but to your point about like it doesn't require any special skill. All it requires is the personality type to make extreme claims and extreme lies. And really it comes down to just people mainly being gullible and not fact checking, right? Like it doesn't there's not many other explanations needed because it just it is obviously easy to fool people because most people just are are pretty gullible. A lot of people don't know about the subject matter, and then also added on the top to the cult, kind of aspect too. A lot of people just aren't doing well emotionally, psychologically, so they may be like especially desiring these things, whether it's a cult or like mastery of some domain. They you can easily fall prey to like really wanting to believe these things, which gets into the people that are especially needy and vulnerable who really want to go down they want to go down this rabbit hole, right, for whatever reason. Yeah.
I could not agree more. I could not agree with more with everything you just said. The way I framed it has been for a few years now, as I have framed it as, people are going to fulfill or try to fulfill their emotional needs. And that's what's driving their behavior. It's not about cognition and thinking the facts through, and I'm going to line up my facts like dominoes and they're all going to lead me in this direction. That's not how we go through life. We go through life trying to fulfill emotional needs. And a lot of people right now, in the last many decades, we have seen from the 70s, 80s, 90s, we can almost classify these decades by the amount of desperation that people have felt over individual finances, job insecurity, wage inequality, familial or relationship difficulties, a growing population creating more and more anxiety and depression and angst, with various social factors. It's easy to see why people feel more pressure now or feel under the weight of uncertainty and misunderstanding and not having a stability in their life. Jobs are not exactly a dime a dozen, and people need to work. Prices going up, just up and up and up and up, and kids and mental instability. I mean, there's just this laundry list of things that people feel their lives are out of their control.
Yeah, life is
And so
stressful. Yeah.
very
Yeah.
stressful. And exactly, it all adds up to stress. And so when people like L. Ron Hubbard or Tony Robbins or Chase Hughes, or Joe Rogan as a spokesperson for these people, right, or platformer for these people, puts them up there and says, these people know what they're talking about. They have answers, they have solutions. Well, people are hungry for easy answers and quick solutions to very difficult problems they have. And they don't particularly want to hear, no, it's hard. No, behavior's hard. No, no, figuring things out is hard.
Yeah.
And so it's easy to see why they reject us. And
They want confident, yeah, they want confident wise men, you know. We want wise men. We are lacking in like people who espouse wisdom and, you know, gurus of real gurus of whatever sort. So people desire that. Yeah.
yeah, they do. They do. And it makes sense why they would go for it, right? We don't have to think of them as stupid idiots,
Right,
because
totally. Yeah.
really smart people will fall for this stuff because they have emotions
Yeah. No, for
and
sure.
emotional needs, right? So I'm really curious. That work you did, I've read, of course, you said you were going to work for this guy who does NLP workshops and seminars. And yeah, you're going to have some stories. And you did. You definitely have some stories. Well, first off, how would you, from your direct experience and your research and studies since then, how would you describe NLP, neuro-linguistic programming? What it is, what it promises, and what actually is it? What do people learn when they're learning NLP?
Yeah, I think no matter how I approach summarizing that, I think there will be different legitimate views on it because it is such a wide area to try to summarize, which is part of the challenge. Like when people go to, debunk it or be skeptical about it, there's always somebody that's like, well, that's not what NLP is. You're attacking a part of it that's not the full picture of NLP, right? So that's just to say it can be hard to summarize it because it is a sprawling thing, right? But by and large, it's a collection of I view it as just the collection of ideas and thinking that arose around the title of NLP, and that's like a hodgepodge of things. Like NLP started, as you said, with Bandler and Grinder. I can't remember how he says his name, but the two main guys back in the 70s, and it was mainly a way to. Well, it started out as a way to like model exceptional people who had done exceptional therapy work for one thing, but it was also related to just like high practicality, high efficiency, and mastery of various things. But to some of their main focus was on these therapists that were known for getting really good results, like what's his name, Milton Erickson, the
Right, the
person known for
hypnotist.
yeah, and they studied his like hypnotic approaches. Um, there's various other things in the mix too, but it related a lot to modes of thinking. Like there's one of the key ideas is like some people have modes of thinking more related to tactile things. Some people have modes of thinking more related to visual or audio. That's one of the key things, and then that ties into like the eye direction thing where you can get clues about what someone's thinking based on where they look. That's another area of it. And these were things, and these were things that were not meant to be exploitative, at least how they initially framed it. It was related to therapy and helping people and such, which is another reason people do go to these NLP events. It's not all exploitative people; it's people who legitimately they are seeking like help in their therapy practices or things like this or teaching or whatever it may be. So there's two elements to it. It's like you can have the more educational helping people aspect, or you can have the like, oh, I want to get secrets that help me exploit people, so there's always been those two sides of it where it's like, oh, by understanding other people, understanding their patterns and reading them and being able to influence them, because that's the other side of the coin. So it's like understanding how people are thinking based on these kind of ideas about how they use language, where they look, their modes of thinking. The other side of that is the how do I influence people with that knowledge I have? How do I use like language to influence them based on my knowledge of how they're thinking, right? And it includes and over the years NLP has grown and changed because what was there in the beginning wasn't there later. It shifted, based on how all these different NLP people did their training and their seminars. But a big part of it came to be, the seminars are what is called transformational or experiential. Well, they will keep you there many days, right? Like several days in a row, and it's packed full of activity, so you get very little sleep. So it kind of has some, and they do unusual psychology related exercises in there. Like, one that I was present for was like staring into each other's eyes for a long time. So it kind of creates these unusual feelings in people, which makes them theoretically more bonded to the experience, and makes people have these unusual experiences. So there's a slew of things in there, which is why it's hard to define or, precisely say what NLP is. Because, for example, like sometimes I'll, if you talk about NLP, the claims about reading people based on the eye contact, eye direction stuff. Some NLP defenders will say like, no, that wasn't initially in, Bandler and Grinder's work. They talked about, it was a clue, but it wasn't that meaningful. And so they'll defend it by saying like, well, that wasn't in the original stuff. And that's just some practitioners who are making grand claims, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just to give you a sense of like, but people who try to defend it will often try to like nitpick things about that's not really NLP, or NLP is more nuanced than that. But by and large, it's a tough space to define. But to me, when you look at people who have done the work debunking or studying these NLP associated ideas, just by and large, none of the NLP associated ideas hold up under scrutiny in scientific study, or but then I should say there's also the NLP trainers and practitioners do bring in various real and respected ideas too. So it's
Right.
in the context of their training, it can be a hodgepodge of like just completely ridiculous ideas that no legitimate, researchers respect at all, and other things that are more legitimate. So that helps explain why it's so easy to, or why it can be so persuasive to people, because you're bringing in a lot of good ideas too, and like that makes it hard to debunk too, because people who take those trainings, they're like, no, that was legitimate, I looked that up, and I'm like, yeah, there's legitimate things in the mix, but by and large the NLP things have been thoroughly debunked, and there's no evidence for them. There's evidence against a lot of it. So just to say, for people that really want to believe it, or for people that have gone down the rabbit hole of like believing these are powerful ideas, there's all sorts of mechanisms that they use to defend it, and I've named a few of them. But I hope that gives a sense of the sprawl of it and what's involved, though.
Absolutely. Thank you for all of that, because it is made complicated. It's made more complicated than it really is in an effort to disperse attention, I think, and
Yeah.
try to keep the semblance of no, there's something here, even if this doesn't quite, or this doesn't quite, there's something
There's
here,
something.
see,
Yeah.
right, as this idea. And it's this sort of eternal hope, I think, that we're trying to crack the code of, some simple this control panel or lever system or something to be able to manipulate or control ourselves and other people. Some people are coming into this looking at trying to solve their own problems too. It's not just about twirling their
Right. Exactly.
mustaches and
Yeah.
you
And
know
to your point, I'll throw in, it's the main goal of these people that promote these ideas, like people like Chase Hughes. I mean, the main goal, whether it's NLP related or not, their goal is to communicate mastery that you need them to help unlock, right? Like they'll use various tools at their disposal. It doesn't have to be NLP. It can be, military intelligence or whatever other things are in the mix for people. But the main goal is to establish a sense that you really need this person's wisdom and their amazing insights, right? And I mean, that explains why in the NLP world, all the the NLP trainers will all have their various flavors and even trademark names of this stuff, right? Like, so, there's a lot of use of the word neuro because there's neuro-linguistic programming, but it also makes it sound like some sort of scientific thing, right? Like,
that's
I
right.
have my neuro strategies, my neuro methods, my neuro whatever. But it also puts a spin on it, like a personal spin. Like, these are my trademarked ideas. You have to come to me for, right? But and to your point too, we should recognize that a lot of these people really believe this stuff. Like the NLP trainer that I worked for, he really believed that, these were amazing things, that he himself like had amazing control over everybody in his orbit. Like he really believed that he was helping people. At least I think he did. So it's just to say, these aren't, like you say, these aren't all like villainous people sitting around like just thinking about how to exploit and manipulate people. A lot of them truly believe, like the NLP trainer I worked for, he would tell this story about like how he didn't believe he was really anything special until everybody started telling him he was, and told him how great he was at doing the NLP stuff. And he was like, oh, I must be a real genius at this stuff. So that was kind of how he went down the rabbit hole. Like, so just to say, yeah, it's good to recognize, have empathy even when we think people are wrong. And then some people are just clearly much more unethical on the unethical side, but it's a mix of people, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. And it's when I was a Scientologist, it was the same deal. I thought I had my hand on the top of this, this mastery of this technology, as they called it, that would enable me to be able to help people to a degree that nothing else could. And so sure, I'll sit for hours in a chair and stare at somebody else, or have other people do that to each other. This is right out of Scientology stuff. And you produce what's called the Gansfeld effect. You get these hallucinations, and you can have auditory and visual hallucinations. You can have all kinds of trance induction, all kinds of crazy stuff happen just sitting staring at somebody else in the eyes. And it gets people feeling giddy, and it gets them feeling nervous, and it gets them all aflutter. And because they're sitting there having to focus their attention on another person in front of them, which they don't normally do. And so it's a new, novel effect that's something I haven't felt before. So therefore, the feelings I'm feeling must be special and new and different, even though, no, literally almost everybody's going to feel that way. For understandable, explainable reasons. But because I've always said that one of the biggest superpowers, and one of the powers that these guys have, is they're the first to arrive with an interpretation of this phenomena. So their interpretation is the one that's going to win, right? If I tell you, sit in this chair for 2 hours and stare at somebody else, and don't blink and don't fidget and don't move around, don't get up, don't laugh, don't do anything, don't let yourself get triggered, just sit there and be there and just do it. And the person starts feeling like they're hallucinating, seeing themselves from outside their body. And I go, yep, you popped out of your body. Your exterior. That proves you are an immortal spiritual being.
Right.
I've now made you into a Scientologist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
With the Gansfeld effect. It's a psychological principle, but I can, and I don't even know about it. I just know, as a Scientologist, I didn't know about that till after I left, right? I just knew that if I could do that, right, here was my interpretation. And it's the interpretation of this phenomena that has so much power for people.
And I will throw in there too, I think an important part of this is, I try to, when I was working for this guy years ago, my takeaway was that there are, like I was saying, there are good ideas in the mix. And for a lot of people that come to those seminars, that can be their first exposure to some of these psychology ideas. Like, for example, a big thing in the NLP world is reframing the meaning of experiences, right? Which is actually a very wise thing, because we do have the power to look at experiences in all sorts of different ways, and getting over trauma and psychological emotional pain. A big part of that is reframing the meaning of that, right? So
that's right.
that is a meaningful concept. And the guy I worked for, and NLP people in general, like Tony Robbins, that's a big part of what he does. It's all about the reframing. It's an important concept, and a lot of people that go to these events, even if there's a lot of bullshit in the mix, they do come away with some ideas that they probably haven't considered before, and could theoretically be life changing. So that's why I do like to be fair and say some people do get legitimate insights and important takeaways from these things, and that doesn't bother me. I think the thing that's bad is when the trainer acts as if they're the person that you have to go for these things, and then is charging like a ridiculous amount of money to do these trainings, where it's like you're not kicking that much knowledge, where it's the putting themselves on a pedestal where they're the guru, right, is where the problem comes in. It's not the and then it's also throwing in a bunch of bunch of bullshit that's theoretically harmful to people too. But if it
Right.
was just like the things that were, like reframing or some of these legitimate things that they will cover in their trainings, that part's all well and good. And that's why I say it's understandable why you will have people that might be watching this. He'll be like, I had a very meaningful, good experience at one of these seminars. And that's fine. I think that's totally legitimate. And I'm not saying that's not possible. So I just want to throw that in there. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's the like I said, it's the interpretation of the event, and what you're walking away with. If you're walking away, that this proves something that it doesn't really prove, then there's a cognitive and real world problem there.
Yeah.
You're walking around living a lie,
And you might get taken for a lot of money theoretically.
exactly,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And that's Scientology in a nutshell, right there.
Yeah.
They sell you a lie right from the get-go, and if they can get that hook and get that emotional commitment, and then they'll start working on you and working on you, and it's this gradual change over time, and all that time you're giving them money hand over fist, and you're being taken for a ride, right? Because there's nothing at the end of this road that makes you a different person in any substantial or basic or fundamental way than the person who you were when you started. You're going to be the same person. You're just going to have been lied to and put through the ringer a number of times and jumped through a number of hoops that you really didn't have to.
Yeah.
And that's where I get a little. That's where my blood boils, is when people are taken advantage of like that. Like I was. So it's understandable.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Motivated me for a long time to dig this stuff up. Um, and yeah, NLP is interesting. The one other thing I want to say about the origin story of it, maybe you can confirm this. I don't know, is that Bandler and Grinder, yeah, I don't know how to pronounce those either. I've only read the man's name, but they were trying to do the scientific research, peer review process, do the standard research process back in the 70s with these ideas. And the ideas sound so cool that you kind of wish they were true. Wouldn't it
Yeah.
be awesome if every time you were talking to someone and they look down and to the left, that means, oh, they're accessing their visual memory right now, right? And I can know that about them, and that will tell me something about them that can assist me either therapeutically or can assist me to manipulate them or whatever. Wouldn't it be cool?
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be cool if every time you meet somebody who talks like, oh, I see that. Oh, I see what you mean. Oh, yeah, I can visualize that. If they're talking like that, that means they're a visual thinker. And so if you use visual metaphor back at them, you can subtly manipulate them. Wouldn't that be
Yeah.
awesome if it
Wouldn't
was
that be
that
cool?
simple, right?
Totally. No, you're right. It's like that I think that's the draw of a lot of bullshit ideas in general. It's like, wouldn't this would be so cool if this thing were true, right? And that's the big draw. And yeah, the other interesting thing, there's all sorts of things to say about NLP, but going back to the origins of NLP, it came about at a time when there was all this like brain asymmetry and symmetry studies going on, which very much influence how NLP played out and like the eye direction and
Yeah,
modes of thought kind of thing, which is interesting. But you go back and look at those studies, a lot of that stuff was just you know, it was like a lot of vague studies. A lot of the studies, a lot of the studies that even found stuff, couldn't be reproduced. So it
that's right.
was like, but there was a lot of interest in that stuff back then, and I think there was this kind of like the '60s and '70s were kind of this. A lot of people were thinking like we're really going to unlock the secrets of the brain now that we've got these tools to study the brain closely with all the imaging things we have. And I think there was this kind of excitement about like we're so close to figuring it out, like we're gonna know that somebody's using this part of the brain and it means they're this kind of personality or whatever. I think there was just a lot of excitement because it helps explain, like when I went back and looked at all the research, there was all this like brain asymmetry and like what's trying to figure out what kind of words people were using, this kind of stuff. So there was that excitement, which I think clearly didn't pan out, from that
No,
time.
and
That's
that's
what it.
exactly right. Is people get excited about these ideas, and unfortunately, to finish the thought was because I think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right about everything you just said there. Because this whole split brain studies and the all this stuff was really exciting stuff in the 70s and 80s, and people really thought they were getting a grip on some things. And sure enough, this is the path of progression and discovery that we need.
Mhm.
And there are going to be alleys people go down that don't develop into something. But the mistake that Bandor and Grinder made, and the thing that kind of upset me about those two, was they went, okay, well, the peer review is showing that this stuff ain't really flying. Like, this isn't really universally true stuff. Well, we're so excited about it, and we're so sure it's true. If I remember this right, okay, we're just going to take this directly to the public. And where, the whole science thing, yeah, we're just
Yeah,
going to
that
go
can wait.
this direction. And so they just kind of shooed the research trail and started doing seminars and workshops and stuff like that, because that was the thing to do in the 70s and 80s. Arenas were being filled up by all kinds of people, from Bill Gothard to, Tony Robbins types.
Yeah.
And now it's online. Now it's the online community. You don't have, you still have conventions and Grant Cardone out there, who's also in this space, from a Scientology grift angle.
Mm.
um they'll fill up convention centers, but they're really, online is where this stuff really, really thrives.
Yeah.
So I just sort of see it as this progression of ideas. You're referring, and what you were referring to earlier, I think, was the human potential movement that was big
Mm.
through the 60s and 70s, and that's where you get EST, and which turns into Landmark Forum, and that's where NLP comes in, and really kind of landed into this human potential movement. But it was more of a social movement rather than a scientific movement by this point. And this is where the grift really came into play, I think.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and so so I think that's the origin story, or at least the fundamental sort of, framework of the origin story of this stuff. So if we go through the greed is good 80s into the, the grunge of the 90s, and the internet coming into play, now we have a whole new field for these people to play in, right? A
Yeah.
whole new sandbox
Yeah.
in the 2000s, with social media taking off and these people able to make a name for themselves. Bandor and Grinder are kind of names of the past now, but now we have our Chase Hughes, and we still have Tony Robbins crawling around. Who else do you see in this space, if we want to name names or talk about types of people or types of grift? What else do you see emerging from what NLP has turned into?
Well, it's a good question. I actually haven't studied it that much. Like, I went down the Chase Hughes rabbit hole, and that led me to see a few other people in that area.
Yeah,
But I do think there's, his compatriots on the behavior panel.
right. Those
The be
guys. Who are those people?
they're, I mean, the fact that they, the fact alone that they chose to partner with Chase Hughes, I mean, I think tells you a lot about who they are. But according to them, they're the number one the four best behavior experts in the world. But don't ask them to come up with any qualifications for that. That's just what they call themselves, right? So there's all sorts of these guys who, and there is a huge incentive to, there's a lot of money involved in this stuff. It's like these guys get millions of views on YouTube, and that translates to hundreds of thousands of dollars, right?
Yeah, big
Um,
money.
yeah, big money for that. And so it's clear there's an incentive. So it's like, but you watch these behavior panel shows, and it's like they're just spouting a lot of like ambiguous, some okay ideas, some mostly just bad and ambiguous, and things could go other way, many different ways ideas, like, I thought about doing a breakdown of like a specific video of theirs to show like just how ambiguous and kind of meaningless these ideas are. But you watch these shows and you're like, okay, they've said a lot of things about what could theoretically be, but what does it all mean in the end? Like, it's just a lot of kind of wishy-washy ideas. And they'll also, a lot of the people that do this kind of work, they're more likely to have like opinion, really high, really confident opinions, the more clear it is that someone was guilty or lied or whatever it is, right? so that's another element of this. Like, yeah, it's very easy after the fact, like, to know that, for example, Chris Watts was a very guilty, acted very guiltily. That was the guy who killed his, wife and children. A well-known case that people examine his behavior. But that's just to say, there can be situations where, like, you're not going too far out on a plank, a dangerous plank, to be confident about somebody's opinion, somebody's behaviors. But there's a lot of these behavior people. There's also like the hypnotist and influence kind of people. Like studying the Chase Hughes stuff led me to see that there was like NLP and hypnosis associated people that would like praise Chase Hughes, and Chase Hughes would praise them. Like
Yeah.
it was kind of like this. There's this whole underworld where they never push back on each other's obvious flaws. They only just say these guys are amazing, right? Like nothing untoward to see about these people's claims of expertise. So there's a whole like ecosystem where they all drum each other up because it's to their best interest. Like, it's not in the behavior panel people know all about Chase Hughes's many lies and exaggerations, and I've told them directly, and they'll be like, oh, you're just jealous, you're just a hater, blah blah blah. They don't care to actually address these things. And like, people that will write me being like, I can't believe that these people won't address these obvious lies and unethical behaviors. And I'm like, well, if they did that, they would have to address many unethical things that they themselves have done. And why did they partner with Chase Hughes in the first place? So there's no incentive for these people who have in this ecosystem to examine these things. But to your question about like specific people, I wish I had more time, because it is kind of fun to make videos about these guys. But yeah, it was kind of random that I went down the Chase Hughes rabbit hole. It was just such an egregious case. That was why I made several videos about it, because I think even in this world, like, he was a very egregious case about lying and exaggerating. But yeah, there's a large ecosystem, and then you have to kind of separate we're just telling you to analyze, we're claiming that we can analyze this behavior, versus like, we're going to get you to influence and manipulate other people, which Chase straddles both those worlds, but they can be very separate worlds. And yeah, I think that's kind of I don't know too much about all the specific players these days.
No, no, that's fine. I appreciate the overview though, and especially the commentary about the ecosystem, because I was going to bring that up, and I'm glad you did. Because there is this sort of mutual supportive system that goes on in this YouTube space or in this real world space, because we are talking about people who are not just making videos on YouTube. They are going out and doing and getting paid quite well to go do business seminars and train recruiters, train negotiators, train, MBA level people in how to do their jobs better. And these people, as business people, are relying on the expertise of Chase Hughes to be who he says he is, because they're taking what he says and they're applying it in their day to day when they're doing negotiations and important work that is going to matter. And if they're taking nonsense and trying to use it in the real world, you're going to have the same effect or same reason or same consequences as if you were to take Scientology into your business. And what happens when people do that? Businesses collapse. That's what happens. There people lose their jobs over this stuff. This can be disastrous when you're trying to take ideas like, oh yes, I'm going to watch his eyes and I'm going to watch what direction they go in, or I'm going to use certain language in a certain way, and I know I'm going to get this result. And it's easy in a training. It's easy in a training to find all the examples of how this is going to work until you hit the real world where the rubber meets the road, and suddenly you're in front of somebody who ain't acting the way Chase said they would. And now what are you going to do?
Yeah, I think
You're unprepared.
one interesting thing about that is that I think one of the not obvious harms of this stuff is related to that, where a lot of people that watch like the behavior panel or take Chase Hughes's classes, they start thinking that they really can read people accurately, and mainly it's just it just serves as a way to like amplify their own biases, because basically what they'll do is and I can show you many examples of this, where like behavior panel fans will be like looking at a video in like the Facebook group, the fan group of Behavior Panel, and they'll be like, I know she's lying based on this one random, ambiguous thing. And like,
Yeah.
so basically everyone's just using these like half-baked ideas they'll get from these people. And it's just another filter for making them feel confident to express what they want to believe anyway. So it's like, I know she's a horrible person. I know that, this royalty member's a piece of shit because she did this one small behavior, right? And then like a lot of things, people will forget when they're wrong about something, and a lot of things are just like personality things anyway. They're like things they'll never know. So they're like, that tells me she's being devious. I just don't like her now, even more. So it just makes people dumber basically because their heads have been filled with all these like confident like things that are just not possible to do in the real world, like get confident reads of people, whether they're lying or withholding information or what their state of mind is when they're telling you something. Like, it's just a pipe dream that you can do that confidently all the time. Like, sure, sometimes I have reads about stuff that I could back up with, a list of things, but it's like that's a very rare thing to be able to reach that level of confidence. And even the things you're highly confident about will be like, not that confident. So it's just to say, yeah, these things are harmful in multiple ways that are not really obvious. And I think that's one of the worst things is just putting all these bad ideas out there. And I think it even, it plays into the political polarization sphere too, where people are watching like videos that that the Behavior Panel has analyzed of political people, and they're like, oh yeah, I know that person's a piece of shit because they did XYZ. And it's like it's just reinforcing what they wanted to believe anyway about various political figures and various
That's right.
celebrities. So yeah, it's kind of an insidious kind of dumbing down of things.
I could not agree more. I mean, you bring in confirmation bias, and you're nailing it. And it is a lot more of that than people are able to recognize in themselves. This is why I'm always going on at a mad rate about, look, if you really want to navigate life, critical thinking and emotional intelligence are the tools you have to have in the holsters on you, that you're walking around with. You've got to take these things to a high level for yourself, which means discipline and practice and using this stuff over and over and over. It's not just knowing a few logical fallacies or knowing a little bit about how people are emotionally driven. It's really understanding yourself and other people from these core ideas. And that's where you'll understand the nuance, and you'll see how much nuance there is. Like, for example, okay, you have written books about poker tells and reading people that way. And I don't imagine for a second that you have some superpower that you can sit at a table with 6 strangers you've never met and be able to wipe the table with them because you're such a great person at poker tells.
Right.
Right. I imagine that's the first thing I'm thinking is, no, you're not, you don't have a superpower and you're not going
Right.
to do that. And I don't have that expectation.
Right.
But there are so many poor schleps out there who do.
Yeah.
And it would be easy for you to use that expectation and feed that confirmation bias, right? But
Right.
I imagine it's not that way because of the nature of the work you do. So how would you describe that? How do
Yeah.
you
No,
talk about that?
totally. And that's actually what makes me so frustrated about this stuff, because it's like I went out of my way to write in such a careful way about poker, and then it's like it's a game, and then you got these people making grand claims about real world stuff, and and I'm just like, that bugs me. Yeah, because to your point, it's like, yes, that's what people have said they liked about my books. It's one of the reasons they like my work is because I'm being very. I'm not saying I'm actually saying I say very specifically. Even the best reader of tells, to my knowledge, is only using this maybe like a few times a session to like, and sometimes it's just swinging a decision that was very close and goes one way or the other. It's not like you're highly confident of it. It's like you might go one way or another based on it's the only information I have to act on. So yeah, I'm very careful to say this is a rare thing you may rely on. It's true that like less skilled players will have more obvious tells. It's true that the more skilled you are, the less likely you are to get a read from somebody. So I was always very careful to be very responsible, how I see it, which is like plays into why I'm so frustrated with these people basically, just saying the most outlandish and extreme things about real world things that could impact real world scenarios, interrogations or interviews or whatever. uh, so yeah, and I will say too, like when people ask me, what kind of behavior stuff, real world behavior stuff do you recommend? I do think there's some very good work about verbal statement analysis, which I think is, if you're interested in reading people, focus on the verbal stuff because that's where people are actually trying to communicate to you. They're using their words, right? So like I just do not I would much recommend reading books like I Know You Are Lying by Mark McClish, who I've interviewed for my podcast, which is about analyzing statements because statements contain a lot of meaning. There's a lot of ways people will try to misdirect your attention in statements and try to do various things with their statements. You can get so much more information out of that versus like trying to read nonverbal behavior because nonverbal behavior is quite hard to read, like other than like some very simple stuff like, oh, this person's nervous, but okay, what does nervous mean? It could be, for many different reasons, right?
That's right.
So yeah, I'll throw that in there for people that like want to know what I find really valuable, and that's I wrote Verbal Poker Tales, which was kind of like my take on. I was inspired by Mark McClish's book about statement analysis in like real world scenarios. So I wrote a book that was analyzing statements that poker players make. And that was actually like, I think that's, I'm not, obviously I'm biased, but I do think it's like one of the best poker books out there because I learned so much writing the book and researching it over like, I worked full time on it basically for almost 8 months. It was like my big project. And I learned a lot doing it. And just to say, there's a lot of information in people's statements, like people, because that's where they're trying to manipulate you, right? That's where they're trying to get you to do certain things, and you can find a lot of like information in there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that because what drove me crazy, what drove me absolutely mad. I was absolutely fascinated with it at first until I realized the limitations and how people were taking it and running and making such hyperbolic, exaggerated claims was micro expressions.
Yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
God. Oh, I just wanted to
We,
start shooting people.
I actually have been wanting to do an episode on that because, yeah, I mean, that and Paul Ekman in general, like there's a lot of, I'll just say it's a lot of BS and exaggeration in the Ekman sphere.
Yeah.
And I had a recent podcast where we talked about that. I had a interview with Tim Levine, who's a deception researcher, and we talked about, a lot of people know that Ekman's stuff is like a lot of it's not backed up by science, but that kind of relates to the importance of the micro expressions, which yeah, I would like to do a deep dive on micro expressions because definitely a lot to say there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you have got to bring in and appreciate cultural, language, geographical, um, ethnic, there's so many foundational things that make us who we are and influence how we act and how we see the world. And one of the things that was most illuminating to me along in the path of learning that for myself was learning how multilingual people. Just to throw this out there as a almost random fact, but it's so interesting, is how multilingual people actually switch how they think when they switch from one language to another. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just a matter of translating the words in your head and then saying them. You actually switch into a different way of thinking. You talk to somebody who's multilingual, and you can talk about this with them. They'll tell you about it.
Mm-hmm.
I first ran into this with bilingual, trilingual people from Germany or France or Belgium, and ended up having very deep conversations about this, not just once. I've talked to a number of people about this because I found it so interesting. Like, what do you mean you think differently? And they go, oh yeah, no, you're it's almost like you have to bring in a whole different value system,
Mm-hmm.
not just words, but all these other concepts and ideas and significances come into play when you're switching the language mode.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, really? And they were like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And it really, I was talking to a Canadian who speaks French Canadian, and he was like, yeah, yeah, it's hard for me to translate this over into English because it's not just words, it's these other things,
Right. The
and
structure of the language. Yeah.
yeah, and
Which actually,
therefore,
that NLP. I think they talked a lot about the structure of the language. Which yeah. Just to say,
yeah.
there's some good ideas in the NLP. Yeah,
Exactly.
body
And
of
as
work.
you
Yeah.
and you talking about how, paying attention to people's language really tells you a lot more about who you're talking to. I could not agree more. But only if you are paying attention to it from the point of view, as far as my take on it is, it informs you how they see things
Right.
in
Yeah.
how they tell you about stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
It's no more mysterious than like, yeah, you're getting a glimpse of their view of the world, right? It's just communication. It's just communication at the end of the day. Yeah. And there can be exaggerated claims about what you can get from that, and there can be
Yeah.
legitimate claims about what you might get from that. But yeah, by and large, people are hard to read, I think. And I would say hard to influence unless they're like, in certain moments when they're vulnerable, or if they're emotionally vulnerable, right? Like a lot of the like cult and influence type stuff is like mainly relying on people that might be quite emotionally vulnerable. So it doesn't actually take that much to influence some people, right?
That's right. That's right. Well, that's what cult recruitment is all about, is if they are not in a vulnerable state, getting them into a vulnerable state. They
Right.
can actually be pushed there.
Right.
They don't just walk into the Church of Scientology, or the forum workshop, and are already like all torn up inside. You
Right.
can push them there. And
Yep.
that's what for example, in Scientology, that's what that personality test is designed to do.
Mhm.
It
Mm.
confuses you a little bit. It gets you all stirred up on a bunch of stuff that is really kind of innocuous, weird questions, but they're not. It stirs
Yeah.
stuff up, and then in that kind of, not necessarily agitated. It's not even at that level. It's just stirring some things up, and then
It's like the equivalent of staring in each other's eyes, but like
a
just a
little bit.
different form. Yeah.
That's right. It's just a little bit of confusion, a little bit of like, why am I answering these questions? What is this? And then you sit down with somebody who's now presented to you as an authority figure. And I'm going to sit here and tell you about your scientific test that's all graphed out here. And you're going to tell me all about yourself. And now we're doing a warm reading rather than a full on cold reading, like they do with, when you walk into a psychic or something, you get a cold reading. Here, it's warm because you're feeding information to the test evaluator, and they have a very specific set of goals in mind for that conversation, and getting you signed up is always at the end of it.
Mhm. Oh, quick aside, you might find
Yeah.
this interesting. Like back in it was probably like 2006. I was in Vancouver, BC. I think it was when I went to a Scientology place and just did a test for fun. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah,
I was just doing it for fun. I wanted to get the experience. And then like 15 years later, my parents, I don't remember even giving them my information. I don't think I would have written it down. But then like 15 years later, my parents got something from the Church of Scientology addressed to me, and I was like, I don't, yeah. So just to
yeah.
say, yeah, they keep track of people.
Oh, they never. Let me say this again to the audience out there, in case this is the first time you're at my channel. Never give Scientology your personal contact information, because they will skip trace you for the rest of your life. They will follow you no matter where you go and send you information and mailings and keep up with that. They got nothing else to do all day. I tell you,
Yeah.
it's wild. Yeah, never give them your address. I don't know any other organization that is as dedicated to tracking and sending you mailings as the Church of Scientology.
Very passionate.
Very passionate. Yeah. So, okay, now let's get back to the so what
Sorry to distract you.
no, 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 no. You're awesome. I'm the one who gets all derailed all the time. Um, okay, what else could we say about this? Yeah, I'm calling it, sort of there's an entrepreneurship of influence I mentioned in the intro. There's this sort of dark psychology space that is sort of created. I see it just sort of graphically as if you have this kind of, the ecosphere of the internet podcast world, or the pod world, or the influencer world, you have different areas or sections of this. And Rogan, of course, is a huge influence in this space just through sheer numbers. And around him, he's created this thing that we sort of call this manosphere, right? And the dark areas of this manosphere involve, the men for equal rights people, right? The men's rights movement, the incel folks, and then you get these influence folks, these people who are, oh yeah, we're going to sell you the tricks to not having to be the victim of society and women and your job and women and and your life and women. And, it's always all about, being victimized by women, right? So there's this whole little space there. And then there's these people who are grifting on that space. That's how I see it. That's how I kind of model it in my head, is like there's this sphere or section or slice of the internet where these guys kind of live. How do you see it, or how do you think about it? Is that?
Yeah, I think I mean, it's hard for me to break it down exactly that clean, but I know you're just speaking generally too, but
Yeah.
I think what happens is, because I've done a good amount of work on political polarization too.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that strikes me is there is this, for Joe Rogan and this kind of sphere of things, it's kind of like they're attracted to anything that's kind of like anti, liberal mainstream
Yeah.
associated, right? So it's like
Yeah.
you even Chase, like if you had somebody that just questioned some major thing that was some liberal view associated mainstream thing, they would get invited on the show because it's attractive to kind of like knock holes in this the liberal mainstream network of ideas. And I see Chase playing, this is an aspect of Chase Hughes and some other people where he, one of the things he does is spreads these ideas that like the government is running these complex psyops on people. Like he's spread these completely nonsense ideas, and he uses his fake, military intelligence, the idea that the perception or the implication that he was involved in military intelligence, he helps sell these really paranoid conspiracy theories about like, hey, I think the government's doing these wacky, wild things and, playing psychological games on the public. So that's part of it too, because Joe Rogan's kind of tied, and I don't, at that level, I don't even see it necessarily as, political related, because there is this love of like conspiracy theories in general. Conspiracy theories are popular on the right and the left, just can be different kinds. And, regardless of who we think is worse, it's just a very popular thing. And so you have Joe Rogan especially is drawn to these like more conspiracy minded things like cover-ups. And that's one of the reasons he wanted to talk to Chase Hughes, because Chase Hughes did a video, they got really popular about the New Jersey drones being government psyops, military psyops.
Oh,
and
did
so,
he?
yeah, it was just completely nonsense. I made a video.
God, of course he did.
Yeah,
You can't disprove it.
exactly. That's the great thing about all these conspiracy theories. You can spout off about them, and nobody's ever going to disprove you. And even if they somehow did, like there'd still be, there's plenty of room for doubt, even when your worldview is completely disproven. So that's the great thing about the conspiracy theories. And Joe Rogan loves a lot of these weird, magical thinking conspiracy theories. So I think that there is this like, the thing I see too is like political polarization has resulted in a lot of people just viewing the act of debunking or skepticism itself as a liberal associated thing, right? Like I think that's something I haven't really seen discussed, but I've experienced this personally when I go into something that's completely not political related, like debunking Chase Hughes, for example, examining his lies and exaggerations. I've seen people respond as if I'm talking about political things, which I think is a clue to how many people are like, oh, you're trying to cancel him. That's a liberal thing, right? So even the act of criticism itself has become, for some people, politically polarized.
Yeah.
Which for a lot of people means that their doors are more wide open to absurd beliefs, because they've gotten to the point where people trying to tell them that they're being, lied to by somebody with a long history of lies, like even that out of a political context, they now associate with political, views, right? So I think that helps us explain why people in like Joe Rogan's listenership are they have their minds wide open to absorb a lot of wacky and ridiculous ideas because the methods for adequately debunking them, those people are getting them to be skeptical of them, are now themselves in doubt. So you've just, and that's not to say like I think we've many people can behave in team based ways for their team and such, and be more open to ideas than they should be. But I do think like people like Rogan and people in that sphere have really helped amplify that, because like why wouldn't Joe Rogan have vetted Chase Hughes? Why didn't he care that he had this long string of like easily disprovable claims about his expertise and his various unethical behaviors? It's like, at some level, Joe Rogan himself thinks like that, like debunking people is like, you know, maybe we got to give everybody a fair listen to, right? That's kind of like a lot of people's ideas, like just hear him out. It's like, well, why do you want to listen to somebody who's has a long rap sheet of telling obvious lies and exaggerations about themselves? Like there's plenty of people to listen to. I'm all for being open-minded, but there's risks and bad things that come when you're just give everybody a platform, right? So,
That's right.
but yeah, I think that helps explain why some people are just like, no, you're trying to cancel him. Canceling is bad. So
No, you're making a great point. You're so spot on with that. There's a tradition that has actually developed in the United States, specifically around the feeding of disinformation to a hungry public, and it goes back to the 80s with the creation of CNN, the 24-hour news cycle, and Oprah Winfrey. There was the talk show format, the daily talk show format. And, and I can't speak to the 70s because the 70s had talk shows and variety shows, but they became more informational in format in the 80s. And, Donahue flips over into Oprah, and she comes out of this tradition, and then she platforms people just like everything you just said about Joe Rogan applies completely to Oprah
yeah,
when she platforms Dr. Oz and,
right.
Mr. Phil and these other people, right? I don't even call him Dr. Phil because fuck that guy.
and
And
and Dr. Phil had on Chase and promoted him, and
of course,
yeah, yeah,
exactly, right? It's
yeah,
the continuation of this,
yeah,
this ecosphere survives because these grifters grift on each other
yeah,
and feed each other, and the lack of, see, for them in their world, the lack of vetting is a feature, not a bug, because it allows them to bring in exactly as you described. Well, let's just hear him out. Let's just hear what he has to say. Well, when you're presenting that information as an irresponsible educator, which I use the term very loosely, but it applies. When you're an irresponsible educator, or you have no real moral foundations on whether objective truth is important or not, then you foist that off on millions of people who are not bringing their critical thinking skills. And you are Oprah or Rogan, who, by the sheer fact of having a big audience, has created authority for yourself. You're biasing a bunch of people to accept bullshit. You're not just giving it a fair shake, you're feeding it to people
yeah,
with your authority. And this is where Oprah really has so much to answer for, and so does Rogan.
yeah,
Because of the irresponsibility of their position.
yeah.
Um,
I do, and I think so much of this just depends on people that are hungry for content too. It's like they're desperate to fill the empty airwaves, right? So they're like,
right.
how can I continue to get clicks? I have to keep bringing on some kind of sensational people to keep my audience up and get the clicks going. Oh, this guy talks about brainwashing and military psyops. I'll bring him on it. Who cares if it's a little sketchy and maybe he's been debunked? He's still, let's hear him out. Maybe he's got some interesting ideas to listen to, and I'll get a lot of clicks out of it at the same time. So
Exactly. And before it was clicks, it was Nielsen ratings and
yeah.
views, and it's all about those advertiser money. It's sad that we live in a consumer-driven world where this is how content is determined, because it's entirely possible that, and of course, many, many times, to give a fair shake, Oprah and Rogan have brought on completely legitimate people and had very interesting conversations with them and shared all kinds of stuff. But as you mentioned, controversy is what really sells and impacts on people. This is not new thinking, I understand, but it's just part of the conversation, so I kind of have to put it there. Not to mention I get so jacked about it.
Yeah, no, it's just it's new format, it's new media. Yeah, it's
That's right.
and so much media. That's the thing. There's just so much content now. Yeah.
That's right. There were two other things I wanted to throw your way here, that I thought you might have interesting takes on. First is, I think that there is something that we talk about reasons and motivations for people accepting pseudoscience and nonsense and running with it, and they're all legit, right? The attention economy, give it to me now, short attention span theater. I have these problems. I don't have a lot of time to research, so give it to me quick, and hopefully that will turn my life around or give me some tools or whatever. And if it's NLP, great. If it's Scientology, great. Whatever it is, I don't care. I just want it to work. And so we understand why people would feed into that. But there's another thing going on, which you mentioned with the divisiveness, and that is an underlying sentiment of massive levels of distrust in our institutions. And this has been a generational evolution, I think. And I look at it strictly through an American lens. I think the same could be applied. I think the same, template could be applied to Britain or to Europe or to China or to any other country, Australia certainly, where the governments let them down over and over and over again. Political figures have taken too much advantage. There have been scandals. There have been this. There's been that. There have been systemic injustices that have been talked about. This whole woke thing is literally, it comes out of the recognition of systemic injustice. That's where it comes from. And the idea that that's not a true thing is ludicrous to any serious person. But the whole anti-woke thing, you bring the culture wars into this to try to fight it. But really what we're talking about is distrust. And when people distrust educational institutions, academic institutions, government institutions, they go alt. They go looking for answers somewhere else that they can trust.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
this grift and this whole grift community, I think, exists because of that distrust. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and not to promote my book, but if people are interested in what I write about polarization, you can look at my website, american-anger.com, because distrust, and I would say contempt for each other. I think there's a lot of real things to be upset about in society.
Yep.
And there's also just a natural dynamic that happens where, polarization, toxic conflict makes people, hate the other side more than they should. And they not just hate them, but also become more afraid of them, become more pessimistic about what they are doing.
Yeah.
So I think there's all these levels of like, yes, there's many real things to build grievances on, because it's very easy to build all sorts of narratives depending on what you focus on, right? Like you can build all sorts of narratives. So we go through this toxic conflict thing where we're building more and more pessimistic views of each other, which makes us more scared, more angry, more contemptuous. We filter everything through those new views, and we find more evidence for our existing contempt and anger. So yeah, I do think there's this process by which there's a fracturing, that happens to any highly polarized nation, where there comes to be like two institutions or systems of like content and even like schools or content creation or schools of thought or media, obviously media. But yeah, I do think that the fracturing and the distrust and the contempt all lead to, when you're more polarized, or when you're more angry and polarized in the sense of political narratives in general, like leaving aside which side is worse or these kinds of things, that it just becomes more easy when you're in a highly emotional state, you're concerned, you're angry, you're scared. It becomes easier to consume things that tie into that angry narrative and lead you down the rabbit hole of getting even angrier and more scared. So I think there's all these things that work at work that relate to these channels of basically dumb content, right? And
Yeah.
we've been focusing on specific ones, but I think there's channels of like, far left thought, I'll call it, or liberal associated thought, where people can behave in very emotional and team-based ways too. I
Absolutely.
think, and regardless of which side any viewer perceives as worse, I think it's important to see like the human element of that, where like emotions lead us to be more dumb in some sense, in a basic sense of the word, to go down these rabbit holes where we go through confirmation bias of various sorts, and we seek out things that align with our views, so yeah, I don't know if that,
Absolutely.
yeah,
No, absolutely. And you know which side is always worst?
the other side.
That's right. That's right. It's
Yeah.
100% true 100% of the time.
Yeah, I like to speak very carefully because I've written these polarization books and trying to convince everyone of the importance of the idea. So I always like to try to
Right.
work in depolarized framings of the problem, right? So
And I appreciate that because I want to do the exact same thing. I brought up the woke thing as an example of where it came from, but believe me when I tell you that, during summer 2020, I was quite irate with the left and a lot of the nonsense going on.
I was in Portland, so I
Oh, you
was,
were in Portland. Oh
yeah, so
man.
I lived there at the time, so I
Oh,
had a
yeah.
bird's eye or a close view of things. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it made me understand. It gave me a better sense of what conservatives were angry about, for one thing,
That's
and
right.
yeah.
That's right. I think that distrust thing is something that's generational. I think it's been around long enough, and specifically since we have brought up the government conspiracies and stuff, that I think it's worth commenting on this separately, or in a little bit more detail, which is that people have very good reasons to have this distrust. I don't want to paint a picture here that there's all these delusional people, and if they would just put their faith back in the institutions, everything would be great. I really don't want to paint with such a simplistic brush, and so I have to use my words here and say, let's be clear that from the 60s forward, 50s forward, if we go back to McCarthyism, we have tons of reasons, a laundry list of reasons to validly and openly distrust our government.
Mhm.
From McCarthyism to, the JFK assassinations to the Martin Luther King investigations and what the FBI was getting up to fighting the civil rights movement in the 60s. The FBI was a fucking little terrorist organization during the 60s when it came to fighting the civil rights movement. Let's just call it what it was. The J. Edgar Hoover was a nut, and he ran this little terrorist group with federal funding, and it was horrible what happened then. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., the Cultural Revolution, the
MK
stagnation.
Ultra stuff,
Oh,
the great
and then that, and
wacky
then
stuff. Yeah.
that, then MK Ultra gets revealed, and that's of course 100% in my world. And MK Ultra is a horror show of civil liberty violations and human rights violations perpetuated on American soil by an institution, the CIA, that has no mandate to operate in America in any way, shape, or form. And yet we're doing human experimentations on unwitting citizens in lots of places, in lots of ways. So many ways we don't even know because they literally destroyed all the records rather than fess up to the congressional investigations that revealed all of this. The only reason we know what happened in MK Ultra is because they literally kept the receipts. It's the invoices and receipts that we have that tell us what they did. That's all we got.
Mhm.
And that is so scary. And the reveals of it were so scary. And then we have, PSY investigations actually carried out. They really did it. They really looked into whether remote viewing was a thing. They experimented on some Scientologists, but they had their, the Ingo Swann, they had his cooperation. My point is that society has had some points of degradation and the government hasn't been there. I mean, Nixon, Vietnam, I mean, holy cow, right? All these things, then government deregulation in the 80s, neoliberal economic policies, creating wealth inequality. There's a lot of reasons for that distrust to exist that are 100% valid.
Yeah.
So that, I believe, is what feeds the validity of that, the fact that you can't argue with those events, feeds the idea, well, shit, if the CIA is willing to engage in human experimentation on American citizens on American soil, well, then surely they might develop mind control techniques using Scientology.
Right. Right.
You
It's
know, and
like
you,
there's a bad leap of logic there where it's like I see that a lot where I'll talk about something and they're like, well, this other thing happened, so like this is plausible. I'm like, sure, theoretically it's plausible, but what evidence do you have? Like, there's many things that are plausible, but
that's right.
yeah, and I do think it's important. Yeah, it's like it's important to recognize two things can be true. Like, there's many reasons to have, to view the government or to come up with any narrative about any human endeavor that's very negative, because like any human endeavor is in general are filled with all sorts of horrible things, right? So it's very easy to be pessimistic and distrustful of all sorts of things, I think. But then you have to recognize too, like it's also possible to be like way too pessimistic and distrustful, where you're not, you're leaping to conclusions that don't have good validity to them. And I think it's important, but that's a very hard line to thread, where you can acknowledge both things and see that, like, sometimes we'll be led down overly pessimistic and dark things, especially when it comes to like a perceived enemy, like them. They're this shadowy group is behind something, right? It's all them, these evil people, right? That I think that's where you get led down these very bad paths that are dangerous and even self-destructive. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I really, really believe that while we can talk about logical fallacies and good critical thinking and even emotional intelligence and the individual factors that drive people, if we don't acknowledge that these truths are out there, that the government has done horrible things, that has created a massive level of distrust in the citizenry, and they have good reason to be looking for the truth, and there are things people want to believe, as we've talked about, simple answers to complex questions like human behavior, or how can I hire the right person at my job, or how do I negotiate this deal. These are complicated processes, and people want the cheat code. They want to get right to the hack and get right to the thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is where these grifters really find their sweet spot, is in these gray areas where things are a little nebulous, things are a little, well, it's a little wishy-washy. You have plausible, it's plausible. I mean, it's plausible the CIA took Hubbard's material and put it in their interrogation manual. It's not really, but not until you know all the facts does it become implausible,
Right.
right?
It's possible, and then yeah,
Possible.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
right. And
There's
so
there's a
people
lot of
will.
writing on that. Yeah.
That's right. But I believe that sentiment of distrust is so built in and so strong in our nation now
So
that it has been the thing that has kind of emotionally opened the door to that, to create that gray area that these guys live in. And if it
yeah,
wasn't that, it would be something else. I mean, if it's not like con men are not always going to be around, but
yeah.
it's just worth talking about, I
It's a
think.
self-rein. Yeah, I do see a lot of this stuff as like self-reinforcing cycles. They all these things are related. They feed into each other. You start to hate the other side more. You're more paranoid about them. You're more likely to believe conspiracy theories, which in turn makes you more angry and scared of them, et cetera, et cetera.
That's
So,
right.
it's
That's
like,
right.
yeah,
Yeah. Because once you find out the CIA has done stuff in America, you're kind of like, well, shit, they'll just do anything, won't they?
yeah,
And
yeah.
and
It's
I got to admit, I got big chips on my shoulder about that because
Yeah, yeah. There's, like
yeah,
you say, it's important to be able to recognize horrible things have happened, and then also still try to demand high bar for believing things currently, right?
that's
Um,
right.
yeah, I
It's
was
a
gonna say,
tough one. It's a tough
Yeah.
one. It's
Then
the
the Epstein stuff definitely did
oh,
that's not helping any conspiracy thinking, you know.
not at all. Because you understand, and it was actually really quite something for me, even myself, to hit up against that. Because of course I know the entire history of QAnon and the 4chan roots of it and all of that stuff. And yet, and you go, yeah, that's all, kids making up stories and it's nonsense and it's this and it's that. But then you realize, no, wait a minute, there is a strain of pedophiles. There is something going on
Yeah.
here. But is it this, government-wide thing? Of
Right.
course it's not.
Yeah,
Come on,
I don't, yeah,
right? Of
that,
course
that,
not.
that's a perfect example where people will be like, something bad is going on here. And I'll use that as a reason to believe like the whole smorgasbord of bad stuff, right?
That's right. That's right. And before they know it, they're down the flat Earth rabbit hole. I mean, and at the end of the day, it's all Lucifer. So, which is fascinating, by the way, on flat Earth. That's where it all goes to, is Satan.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, I
Yeah,
hadn't.
it's 90%, but about 95% religiously driven.
Oh, geez, I didn't even know that.
Yeah. Speaking of, there was another thing I wanted to bring up that I thought I almost fell out of my chair when I learned this, and so I had to bring this up with you or to you. Chase Hughes suffers from temporal lobe epilepsy.
Um,
It's,
do you want me to
did,
comment on that?
well, the reason I bring it up is very specific, and I don't know that you're going to be familiar with this, which I think you're going to love hearing this. Okay, so temporal lobe epilepsy is the most common form of epilepsy that's out there. It is a complicated subject, and I am not a medical professional, so I am not commenting on this to say with certainty that this is what's going on with Chase. But he has admitted openly and made videos and, in fact, grifted off the fact that he's got TLE, this brain damage. And he makes this whole video and is selling this, some kind of blue supplement or something.
Blue.
Yeah, which really kind of just, of course he did. But here's the thing about TLE that I think you might, that I don't know if you know. I've done 2 podcasts in the past with a man, Dr. Yuval Aor, who has forwarded a theory that L. Ron Hubbard suffered from temporal lobe epilepsy, and in fact, it is a growing thought in certain people in the ex-cult space, myself, John Atack, Yuval, and others, that TLE and epilepsy has for a long time, way preceding my lifetime, been called the religious disease. There's a religious component of extreme religious belief that tends to accompany certain forms or instances of epilepsy. And L. Ron Hubbard certainly had religious megalomania as part of his feature set. But there's a sub thing I wanted to talk to you about, which I didn't know if you knew about, connected to TLE, which is called Geschwin syndrome. And it's a group of behavioral phenomena evident in some people with TLE. Not everybody who has TLE suffers Geschwin syndrome. But it's an interesting thing to look at when looking for motivation, or why would these guys be acting the way they're acting. Because Geschwin syndrome brings a certain phenomena into play that are just interesting. You just go, really? That could be why he's that way? And it doesn't justify any con. It doesn't make it okay.
Right.
It's just interesting. Geschwin syndrome brings about certain phenomena, 5 primary changes: hypergraphia, which is writing a lot, like a lot. You express yourself in a lot of words. You write a lot. L. Ron Hubbard is one of the most prolific authors to have ever lived. Hypergraphia is what we call that. I almost fell out of my chair when I downloaded Chase's ellipsis manual and saw that it was 1,400 pages long. I was like, holy shit, man. I knew you had this book put together, but Jesus, that's a big book. That's Madame Blavatsky style writing. That's huge. That's L. Ron Hubbard style writing. That's hypergraphia. I went, huh. Right. So when I learn he has TLE and I see that. And I go, oh, that's interesting. And there's another aspect of it, which I wanted to ask you about in your deep dives on Chase, hyper religiosity.
Hmm.
Some individuals may exhibit hyper religiosity. It doesn't have to be there, but I'm wondering if it is. Characterized by increased, usually intense, religious feelings and philosophical interests, and partial epilepsy patients experience frequent auras in and they get these when they experience a temporal lobe epilepsy seizure. It doesn't look like a grand mal seizure. They're not flopping around on the ground. They go off into some other place.
Hmm.
Kind of looks like they skipped for a minute or something, but to them, they might have gone off to someplace and been there for a year. Like
That's
a
what he
very
says. Yeah, yeah.
kind of spiritual or religious experience or a metaphysical. If they're not religious, they may equate it to a metaphysical kind of experience.
Yeah.
I don't know if Chase has ever discussed anything like that, but it can create extreme atheism as well as extreme religiosity. But it's around that area of thinking. There's grandiose,
Mm,
very exaggerated thinking.
right. Well, yeah, I think he is into that. Like he's doing a lot of you know, spiritual kind of like, talking about psychedelics and stuff too, talking about spiritual stuff. But I will say, like, I haven't watched a lot of his, content. I watched specific things he's made. I will say too, like, the guy has lied so much about so many things. Like, I would have to be shown a respected doctor's paperwork to believe he has that disease. And,
Got
he
it.
could have that disease. I'm not saying he does or does not. I'm just saying when someone has lied about so many things, I I don't. And there's also is an element of more narcissistic people claiming, thinking, being more hypochondriac in nature. So
Fair enough.
I just think,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
fair enough.
he could. I'm not saying he doesn't. To be clear, I'm just saying when somebody has said as many lies as you said, it's good to take things with a big grain of salt until you can prove it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Fortunately, he is someone who could get brain scans, and we could prove that.
Yeah.
I have wondered about Werner Erhard, the founder of EST, as someone who may also, suffer from this condition. It's once you see it, you start thinking, huh. It's thought Edgar Allan Poe may have suffered from this condition. Certainly, John the Baptist, his big, you know, moment on the road, with the light and everything. It's kind of like, well, maybe.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean,
There's,
it's possible. Yeah.
yeah, it certainly is interesting to have it as a potential explanation for what would cause someone to be this way.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. It can be very hard to understand, some people's way of being, because even just on a, even on just on the level, like, it seems like a very stressful way to live to me. But that's it's an interesting way to live. And yeah, it's very hard for me to understand a lot of people these days.
it's hard. It is hard. And it's hard to get your head around the fact that someone can grift and yet believe in their grift,
Yes.
you know?
Yeah.
And yet I'll put out there that I think I'm thinking, I'm wondering aloud when I say stuff like this. This is still a forming sort of theory, I guess you could say, if I dare call it that. Um, Knowing what I know about my own experience and the experience of so many other people in the Church of Scientology and other ex-cult members that I've interviewed over the years, the power of belief and determination to enact those beliefs to make a better world can look so much like narcissism
Mm.
because you're so determined and you're so sure you're right, and you're willing to adopt an ends justify the means mentality to achieve your goals,
Right.
that it can look like a narcissistic, self-centered, megalomaniac expression, but you're really just so much on a crusade.
Right.
that from the outside it can look like that. And I'm not, again, this is not an effort on my part to mitigate responsibility, explain it away. I did horrible things when I was in Scientology. I'm not a narcissist, but I was certainly a determined crusader
Yeah, no, I think
and
that's an
true believer.
important. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I think that's an important distinction. When I interviewed somebody for my podcast about psychopathy, we got on the topic of how there can be, there's so much simplistic thinking in a lot of these realms where it's like, yeah, if you really believe something and you're a true believer and a crusader, you are going to act in ways that seem, you know, that seem or are sociopathic or narcissistic. There can be many factors involved in bad behavior in general, but yeah, I think there's too often a tendency to just be like, oh, they're a narcissist, they're a sociopath, whatever it is. Yeah.
That's right. And given the different forms of narcissism, I mean, maybe it could be classified as a kind of narcissism because you do also have benign narcissistic behavior. And there's various categories and boxes that people are creating for this to try to, and at the end of the day, these are just words to try to explain behavior. But
Yeah,
it's, I find it interesting. So I wanted to throw it at you, see what you thought about those things. And
no, for sure.
there's, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. No, I think yeah, I mean, a big part of my podcast work is examining some things that people approach with too simplistic, a lens, and trying to see that there can be many factors at work, and that just because somebody behaves badly doesn't make them necessarily just a narcissist or a psychopath or whatever. Trying to see the nuance and not just like embracing our simplistic labels because they make us feel good is, I think, is important and related to what we're talking about too. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. What are your take? And you've written books on this now. You've certainly done some wonderful podcasts and articles. You really go out of your way to get it all written out too and stuff, which I really appreciate. It's really
I
wonderful
need
diving into your
well,
stuff.
I need to really present the Chase Hughes stuff specifically because I got so many people coming to me being like, "Hey, you're just angry, you're just jealous." So I was like, I need to really put this in a really easy to summarize thing, which I still don't think it could isn't the best form, but hopefully I think most people read it and thank me. That's by and not 90+% of people know what's going on when they read the summary of Chase Hughes, but I still get people being like, that's just a bunch of things, he was just doing a fake it till you make it approach, that's just normal stuff. I'm like, if you think that's normal, like, I wouldn't want to trust you with any business or personal decisions, but no accounting for ethics.
No, no, there isn't. And it's
Yeah,
really, that distrust factor, I think, really messes with people's morality and a willingness to compromise morality,
judgment. Yeah, there's a lot of suspending of judgment if if somebody if you like somebody, or there's a lot of like, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt kind of stuff. Yeah.
That's right. Fundamental attribution error reigns supreme. That I'll give myself a pass where I'll judge others more harshly kind of fallacy, right? It's just lives so large in this space. Do you, beyond what we've discussed, are there other factors at play, do you think, behind the motivation of people to lift up these folks like Chase Hughes?
Um, I'm sure there are, but I feel like we've touched on some of the major ones.
The
I mean,
basic stuff, yeah.
I think distrusting or wanting to knock the establishment, or some disliked group or system is a big part, and then you've got the wanting to get clicks and attention part of it. Yeah, I think those are some of the two major ones. Yeah,
Yeah.
two of the major ones for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. I'll throw one other thing into the mix, and then maybe we can move toward wrapping up. I've loved having this talk with you today. It's been really nice. Thank you
Me too. Yeah. Thank
for
you.
doing this. I was impressed by a podcast I saw when I was doing, the thing in Scientology that they have that bypasses a lot of the need for watching people's eyes and paying attention to their body language and stuff is they have this e-meter.
Right.
And this thing is famous, right, or infamous. And it is really just 1/3 of a lie detector, and that's it. That's all it is. It's just measuring skin resistance. And I've done in doing all the research that I did, and it took me way longer than it should have, but I really wanted to be thorough. To debunk it, I did a whole video debunking this thing for that I hope ex-Scientologists at least will watch, because they're the most vested in believing that this thing works. Even after they leave Scientology, they still think it works. And there's the amount of indoctrination in Scientology around this device and the amount of mythic lore surrounding it is incredible. It's not a minor part of Scientology. So it bypasses the need for a lot of this, more micro expression tuned psychology, right? Because you just have the meter and the needle goes and there it is. And okay, tell me what you just thought of, because you're clearly got an answer to this question I just asked you because it reacted. That's about the simplicity of how it works there. And I watched a CIA, I think it was a CIA or FBI polygraph operator talk on a podcast. She'd been retired. Now she does it in the business world or whatever. And she spoke much, much, much more intelligently about the efficacy of this device, of the polygraph. Not the She wasn't talking about the meter, but about the polygraph in general and how you would actually use it in the real world versus what you see on Maury Povich or what you see on TV or whatever, with the sensationalistic, we put your fiance on a lie detector and guess what, you're fucked. That that's never good. I guess I'm bringing this up to demonstrate that she spoke with so much nuance.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
You get a reaction to something, all there's a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
You do not know in any way, shape, or form as a polygraph operator why it reacted the way that it did. And to assume you do would be a mistake.
Right.
And this is a pro level, did it for decades person doing that work, right? And that's where I think we get a recognition that that we can move past the pseudoscience a little bit when we have somebody able to talk with nuance that way, with like, hey, look, it's not, there are no certain answers here. This is a window, this is an opportunity for me to get this person to talk. Maybe there's something to expose, or maybe they just had a stomach ache right now, right? I don't know yet.
Mm-hmm.
But people just want that. No, it
Certainty.
means he lied, like they just want that fast thing, right? That's where the nuance disappears.
Yeah. The desire for certainty. Yeah. I think long ago, years ago, I had an idea for a book that would just be about how the desire for certainty, is like our core human weakness and problem, because we just, the existential, angst and anxiety of living in an uncertain world where, it's hard to find meaning and we doubt the meanings of things and we are always searching for meaning. It's like we're always looking for things that we can grasp onto that are certain, that we know, right? And that's like I just think that's such a base level like thing that explains so much bad human behavior, malignant behavior, malicious, psychopathic behavior, narcissistic behavior. It's like we really crave the certainty about ourselves and the world, and so we are drawn to these, grasping onto these things that give us some sense of solidity, and that we're, maybe that we're above other people, or that we know better than other people, or that we have the secret that other people don't, or that we've finally latched onto the meaning that will make sense of this crazy world. So yeah, I do think so much of that comes down to like we really want to know things because it is comforting to know things. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, after all the stuff you've read and studied this, because you've done deep dives just like I have on this stuff for years now. What's your basic takeaway about people reading? If you were going to sort of summarize it or put it into some easy to understand principles.
Well, I think hard to sum up, but I think like I said, I think the verbal stuff is so much more, verbal statements, statement analysis is so much more important than and meaningful and reliable than studying nonverbal, body language. I do think there are things you can pick out. I mean, I think that one of my big things, which I have been meaning to make a podcast about, is the difference between more formal environments like games and sports and more open-ended things like real-world situations like interrogations or interviews, or when you get into situations where there's a more formal thing going on, where say there's a very clear dynamic where like you want to win this poker hand and there's certain things you must do in the poker hand in the context of that poker hand, and there's certain feelings that often arise that are very polarized, right? It's like you're either you're bluffing, or you're going to win often, or near certainly you're going to win. There's very polarized ranges of emotion that, and you're doing a very specific activity that does not map over at all to like an interrogation or an interview or real world scenarios where you could be having a range of different motivations, a range of different emotions, and you're not nearly in this polarized state where you're like bluffing or not bluffing. So it's just to say the context matters a lot for these kinds of things, and that's helps explain why I wrote books about poker tells, and I believe you can find a lot of information there, and yet I'm extremely skeptical about people that claim you can get all this information out of real world situations, right? So the context, I think, and the environment is very important for figuring out if you can deduce reliable information from behavior of whatever sort. So I think that's very important. And, a lot of people are confused by that. They're like, oh, you wrote books on poker tells. You have to be into all this other stuff that people are, claiming you can get from stuff. I'm like, no, like in most real world situations, I find it very hard to know what people are thinking or what their goals are, other than like there's a lot of obvious stuff that goes on, right? Like, in poker, in any game, just as in the real world, sometimes there's very bad players, right? Like you can sometimes get a sense, like watching an interrogation, you can tell, like somebody's like a very unskilled criminal and they're giving a lot of information away by how they act, or, how they behave or how they speak. You're like, this guy's clearly guilty. Like there's clearly like unskilled and skilled practitioners. But when it comes to like most real world scenarios, it's very hard to get reliable information about what somebody's thinking, because people are just good at deceiving you, right? Most people are pretty good at distracting you from what they don't want to tell you, or most people are pretty good at acting nonchalant when they're actually nervous. Most people are pretty good at these things. So to think that you could easily get reliable information, like clear cut information about like what somebody's telling you in a interview, or a political speech or whatever it may be, it's like it's quite hard, other than but that is to say that there's still a lot of information you can get, but most of it's in like the words that people use, right? Like a politician is asked a question and they deflect from it and they clearly don't want to answer it. Why don't they want to answer? That could be for many reasons, right? We don't know if it's because they have something to hide, or they're uncomfortable, they want to talk about something else. But a lot of the things that we can deduce are like quite surface level things that a lot of people just deduce every day about other people, right? So a lot of the most meaningful stuff is just like due to critical thinking about like, what is this person trying to do? And like to delve into all this like wishy-washy body language stuff is like missing the abundance of information we have about people that's right there on the surface, that we could be like, well, why didn't he answer that question when he was asked, or why did he use this language why did he use this ambiguous language to describe something when he could have used more specific language? Or why did he not directly deny his involvement? Why did he use ambiguous language to deny it? There's all this stuff that we could be actually using our intellect to examine, that's much more reliable than where somebody was looking when they spoke, or if they looked a little nervous, like I'm nervous most of the time. I would get, I get interviewed in any situation. Like, what does it mean? So yeah, that's kind of my rough summary.
Yeah, that actually brings to mind one other thing, which was, I'm a little disturbed by this, and maybe you can comment on it more than I know about. The proclivity, or the sort of the fact that not only are corporate negotiators or recruiters getting involved in this stuff, but so is law enforcement, and has been for quite some time. looking for ways to read people, to understand people, to get answers out of people. I think there are very few people in this world more motivated to try to learn all the hacks and shortcuts to the human mind than law enforcement. And I'm talking about police, I'm talking about, FBI, all of it, right? And we hear endless stories about behavioral analysis and behavior profiling, which the FBI was incredibly reluctant to get into back in the day because, assuming people were evil and the criminal mind, as J. Edgar Hoover likes to talk about, was a very popular meme back before behavioral analysis and understanding people became a thing. So now they are readily adopting Chase Hughes stuff, like that they'll go to these seminars and workshops and learn this stuff too. Am I right? Am I off base with this? This is my understanding of what's going on.
Well, I don't really. I think it's hard to say like how many people are into this stuff, right? Like, because it's not clear to me like how many people are paying Chase Hughes for his guidance, right? Like,
Okay.
so I think it's important to keep in mind that it's hard to say who's using this really. I think one time
Okay.
Chase said recently he was asked that question about who comes to his who gets his one-on-one training or in-person training kind of stuff, and he said something like I think it was like business people and therapists or something. I don't I'm not even sure he mentioned law enforcement or anything like that.
Oh, I
So
thought he
that
had. Maybe I
he
misread.
I mean, he definitely he definitely says that they use him. He
Mm-hmm.
definitely says that. But when he was asked specifically about who comes to his trainings kind of question.
Mm.
So it just made me think like
Mm.
there's a doubt about who exactly is coming and how many of them, right? Like
Right.
we don't have insight into that really. But to your point, I do think law enforcement has become better, in the sense that they've had there's been a lot of negative articles about them using, you know, debunked or untrustworthy process behavior
Right.
reading processes. So that some departments have faced pushback for using these kind of like wishy-washy behavior reading processes. So I think they're on the plus side. I think there can be, at least for the like more established, reputable kind of places. There's more. I think there's more cognizance of like we don't want to get bad press by like embracing some training. I do think it more often happens that individuals are going off and getting the training on their own, right? Because
Mm.
they've thought like, oh, this could be cool. Um, but yeah, as far as like, I haven't really seen evidence recently of law enforcement embracing these ideas at like a department kind of level. But I could
Good.
be wrong.
Good.
I haven't delved into it.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah, no, I haven't seen it at the department level either. I've just been concerned because all the way going back to the satanic panic days, the grifters who were pushing satanic cells and cults exist in every town and they're hiding in every barn and don't you know, right? And I saw so much media
hmm
of sheriffs and county,
yeah,
and state and city level troopers all the way back to then. And
yeah,
I'm not just connecting those dots, but from that time forward, I've seen these, pseudo psychological methodologies, you could say, sort of insinuate themselves in and out of these law enforcement agencies over
for
the
sure.
years. And I've always kind of bookmarked it a little bit, like, oh, that's not right. That's not
Yeah,
good because,
there's plenty of evidence and write-ups about departments using the NLP kind of ideas, like
yeah,
the eye direction and
yeah,
these kinds of things. And also like there's some other behavioral wishy-washy stuff that's been covered from time to time. But yeah, I think it is a problem. I think I definitely cannot say how big a problem it is these days. But I do think, yeah, I think the other nice thing, positive thing too is, and I've covered this a little bit in one of my episodes where it's like, I think as long as like there's all sorts of theoretical ideas people can learn, right? Like that have low to high meaning or proof. I think that's not, it's not necessarily a problem for officers. You know, if we're talking about individual officers to go off and learn this stuff, not department level. I think in practice, it's not as big a problem as it might be, because I think in practice, how it happens is like they're just compiling a lot of theoretical ideas, and in practice, it doesn't actually play out to be meaningful, because they still have to like get evidence for pursuing someone as a suspect. So like if it plays a role at all, it's usually in like these minor things, like how often do they have a suspect where they, you know, how often are cops pursuing a suspect that they don't have like actual evidence on, right? So I think it usually doesn't play out where they're like accusing them based on a body language thing, and that like, I know you did it, you know. I don't think it plays out like that. I think it's more just like for the people that embrace it, it's like, I think it could play out that way, don't get me wrong, but I think for a lot of people it's like they're just perusing all these ideas, and then like it actually doesn't really play a role, because most of the people who learn that stuff just know it's like could be true, it could be reliable, but they don't have much, you know, it's not like they have like high confidence and they're going to base like some important police decision on it. So that's just to say like some things could be bad, but I also think the way it plays out in practice, even for people that believe a lot of weird stuff, it doesn't actually play that big a role when it comes down to the actual procedures they follow. Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Well, I wanted to bring it up as a point because
No.
it's a series of individuals in our country. There's only so many thousands of police officers, and yet those people hold an inordinate amount of power in their hands, and literally the power of life and death. And so their split-second decisions or how they interpret the world matters in a
Yeah.
significant way to all of our general health and well-being. And so this is why when stories of cop abuse come up, they're so incendiary, because we've put so much power in those people. And they're the ones who get to walk around openly with guns, and we don't even look twice, right?
Yeah.
And
And I definitely don't want to downplay it. It's
yeah,
like I said before, I think that's the insidious harm of a lot of this stuff, because a lot of people will use it to just basically engage in confirmation bias, where they're like, oh, I saw him look this way, now I know, you know, I know he's guilty. So I mean, to say I do think that that is a danger for a lot of these wishy-washy ideas of various sorts, where there some cops may just be like, oh, now I'm extra certain in my read that they're guilty, right?
because that's going to make them double down on extracting a forced confession, for
For
example.
sure. Yeah. Or
Right.
abuse. Yeah.
Yeah.
A forced confession. Yeah. Various ways. Yeah. Various ways of abusing someone who shouldn't be, like, yeah, roughly interrogated or
That's right.
long
That's right.
interrogations. But yeah,
Because it's really,
yeah,
uh-huh.
it's a thing. I just think, on the plus side, I think it may not be, it may not play out as often. There might be a reason you don't often hear about the behavioral stuff playing a role
Yeah.
in these things. Yeah.
Fair enough. No, you're absolutely right, and I don't want to overstate the case. I really just wanted to bring the subject up because I have concerns, and yes, I'm the first to admit that some of those concerns are from ignorance, and I own that because I don't know exactly precisely the training programs of all the cops. They have lots of them, but when these grifters get into those spaces, and they do, that I have no question about that,
Yeah.
they're not helping the situation at all, right? And
No,
it's just something that people don't think about too much because we talk almost exclusively about the public, the general public who fall, or the vulnerable and emotionally vulnerable public, or the senior citizens, or the religious extremists, and we kind of categorize these victims as, you know, sort of in these different groups that are not cops. We think of the authority figures as kind of above this, and you know, they would never
Mhm.
fall for this, and oh no, they're just as human, and please understand that they definitely fall for it,
Yeah, for sure.
you know.
No, they definitely, yeah, it would be good to know. I think the one interesting thing about Chase is like the one official thing I could find him involved in, like at a department level, was like some small, like, it was like something to do with some like small naval legal or law enforcement thing, but that was like the only thing I could find where somebody had embraced him at some department level, and even then it wasn't even clear what he did. It was just like
Right.
somebody mentioned him as if like he had maybe come to some event. So yeah, just to say, it's hard to get an insight into like where these people are getting their hooks into various places. Yeah.
That's right. It comes up in weird, surprising ways. And you're sometimes you're really shocked at where stuff happens. Just to put the cherry on top of this, and we can wrap it up. Um, there was a there was some movie, and Adam Driver was in it. It was about the enhanced interrogation techniques that the CIA or that the military were using at Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo and various places. And of course, I am rabidly against any form of what so-called enhanced interrogation, meaning torture. That it is the euphemism. They acknowledge it as such. This has been a subject of congressional hearings, and in fact, the report that some of these congressional investigators got, they made this movie about, and the torture methodology, you could say, that they were adopting was coming from a couple private contractors. It wasn't even developed internally. It was they hired out for it, and these guys came in and said, "Oh yeah, here's what you do, da 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 da," and here's all these. Then they had this whole array of procedures that were guaranteed to extract information from people, and this was torture. And so even there, who are these private contractors? Well, a couple of idiots. That's obviously who they were, and they sold this bill of goods that we can extract the goods from people if we hurt them enough in enough creative, interesting ways. And that's just not. And we now know that doesn't work either. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Even down to beating on people, and you still can't be sure they're telling you the truth, right? Which was the classic problem. I thought of it because when we were talking about the police, the third degree used to be official police policy until human rights activists put a stop to it. And then psychological warfare became the way to extract information from criminals or potential criminals. And that's why this has so much appeal in that world, I think. So just like I said, it's not my main line, but it's just something I want to.
Yeah, no, it's good to be. Yeah, you definitely want to be skeptical about the ideas that are getting in these institutions and divisions of various sorts. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Now, getting back to you, because I want to wrap this up and I want to give you a chance to talk some more, because okay. I'm dominating this conversation.
Oh.
What other things do you or are you going to be looking into now? You've mentioned a few things you want to do some podcasts on. Where are you going with your work now? Because you're so adjacent to so much of what I do, and I'm absolutely I just love your work. So I just want to know. Yeah, I want to connect people with you and what you're doing.
Oh, thanks. It means a lot. I mean, I don't get that many people telling me that, so it definitely means a lot. Yeah, I just recently moved to New York and started a new relationship and a new job, so I don't have that much free time these days,
No, so I want more.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and the podcast obviously takes some effort, so I'm kind of struggling with that. I don't know what's going to happen with that because yeah, it's hard to juggle all the things I got going on right now.
All right.
But yeah, I don't have any firm plans. But if you're curious, you can follow my podcast at behavior-podcast.com if anyone's curious about that. But yeah, sorry, I don't have any specific plans right now. Just
no, it's
just struggling to get by and figure out what to do with myself.
I hear you. I'm in the same boat. This is what I love to do, but it's hard to do it. So thank you very much for coming on my show, Zach. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it. It's an honor to be asked.
Yeah, you like I said, you do good work. Behavior-podcast.com. Link is in the description section below, folks, so you can check that out down there. And if you're listening to this on an audio-only podcast version, the link is also in the description section for this podcast today. So you can check out his podcast and his YouTube channel, and I encourage you to do so. It's just the kind of stuff I like watching, a methodical, systematic, deep dive into nonsense, and let's take it apart. And
Thanks.
and some wonderful look at, like I try to do, like deep dives with professionals. Like, let's really talk about this. Let's talk about hypnotism. Let's talk about neuroscience. Let's
lie detector.
Talk about behavioral analysis, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, lie detector. I got a polygraph one on there. Yeah.
Yeah, love it.
Mhm.
All this stuff. So it's complicated, folks. Sorry, didn't make the rules. It's just how it is. It's not easy to understand. But boy, is it fun. Okay. On that happy note, thank you very much for coming around and watching us babble on at a mad rate about all of this. Very much appreciate your viewership and support out there, and hope that I will see you again next week. Bye-bye.